Before we get into the blood sport that is American politics right now with our guest Charles Croucher, a note from the sponsor of our show this week, KO.
And with both winter codes of football launching, you can watch every game, both the AFL and NRL Premiership seasons, anytime, anywhere in Australia with KO.
And don't be like the rest of Australia and forget about Super Rugby, because you can also watch that too.
And speaking of blood sports, you can get your UFC fix whenever you feel like it. All you got to do is sign up with your free trial today. So thanks to KO, and let's get on with the show. You're listening to Errol Parker and Clancy Overall, editors of the Betoota Advocate, on Desert Rock FM. Welcome back to the Betoota Advocate radio show, live here from the Old City District in Betoota, recording in the Budgy Smuggler studio. Now, there's been a lot going on of late. There's been a lot of elections. It feels like we get a cluster of elections that we're invested in, the Australian news cycle's invested in. We get a cluster of them every few years, all in a row. Obviously, last year we had the federal election, the Australian federal election, and then shortly after that we had the British election, and now, obviously, one that we've steered clear of because it's of no interest to that many people in Betoota is the American federal election.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we've been focusing more on the local council elections that are coming up later this year. We've got a swathe of very strong local candidates, and Keith Carton's looking to cement his 17th term as Mayor of Betoota. And from all things we know, it's going to happen again.
Keith Carton's Real Australian Party are looking good to take out the mayor position again. But in an equally controversial political chasm on the other side of the world, we have a Republican president, Donald Trump, who is, at this point in time, going to be running up against one or two leathery men who are actually older than him, in the shape of Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. So to talk about that today, we're crossing live with Channel 9's US correspondent, Charles Croucher. How are you, Croucher?
I'm great. Just thinking of Keith Carton on his 17th term, he's still younger than all three men in the race over here.
Mm. Yeah, he is. And he's done a lot of living, as all of them have done. As a lot, you know, I mean, Trump's never drunk. Bernie looks like he's kept it pretty tidy, but Joe Biden, do you reckon he's had a few dinner parties in his time?
So Joe Biden's a bit like Trump in that they both try to stay away from booze because of like family histories, which is always one of those issues. You think maybe there was something when they were a bit younger as well, but Joe Biden has definitely done the Washington circuit for a long time, decades.
And that we say kind of in this current position where we're in, like, it doesn't look good for Bernie Sanders at this point at all. But Bernie Sanders is the grandfather that still works as a bootmaker, you know? He's 80 years old. He's still at work. You can leave him there all day long. He can help out in the restaurant as well. But then you've got Joe Biden, who's kind of the grandpa that all the aunties are fussing about and, you know, want to make sure he's had dinner. And has anyone seen him?
He's the grandpa that kind of retired 6 years ago and has started thinking about coming back. It's like those rugby league players that come back after 6 years and everyone's like, oh, I'm not sure if that's a good idea and I'm not sure how that affects your long-term mental health. That's Joe Biden at the moment, except he's 77 years old.
Yes, there is a certain Len Ainsworth quality to Joe Biden here.
Yes. Yeah, I guess
exactly right.
Another metaphor is he is the Jamal Idris of American politics. Due for a comeback. Everyone thought he was done.
He was part of a really good team in about 2012. That's about right.
Now, can you tell us, you've seen it, and you are luckily an insider outsider. You've got actually, you know, a lot of American media aren't in the position you are in, whereas you're not overly invested in the result as a countryman, but you are a nerd, top to bottom. And you've always been a nerd. We've seen you since your early days in Darwin. You know, you got your head around Darwin's volatile political climate at the time, and now, of course, you've translated those skills to the American presidential race. What are you seeing? Can you break down the brands that we've got? I mean, everyone talks about deplorables, the Trump voters, the Bernie bros, but what does each of the 370-something men currently in the race, what do they all represent to American identity?
Well, Donald Trump is and wraps himself in the flag, sometimes wraps the flag in himself and kisses it on stage. But Donald Trump has this stranglehold on patriotism, or what is believed to be patriotic, particularly in some of those smaller flyover states. You know, we've all seen the Trump rallies. I can tell you they are out of this world when you actually go to them. The energy. You know, there are old people that walk a couple of Ks in the rain, in some examples, to line up to then get inside to hear what is effectively the same speech time and time again. But these are fanatical fans. There are young fans. There are older fans. They vote with their feet, they vote with their wallets, and they love the president. And the thing about Donald Trump is they have made up their mind. He says that he could shoot someone in Fifth Avenue. I reckon he could go even further than that, and they would still vote for him. The Bernie bros are kind of similar in their own way. This is a lot of young people, though, and a real bulk of young people who are looking at the world now and saying there have been political institutions for the last couple of decades that have tipped the odds against us. They've got their thumb on the scales and they're making it hard for us. And what they're seeing in Bernie Sanders is someone who is genuine. He's authentic. He has always been this way. And they're also seeing their student debt paid off. They're seeing free college in the future. They're seeing legalised marijuana everywhere. And they think this could be a good life as well. They're seeing a more egalitarian society. The question then becomes, what's Joe Biden's crowd? Yeah. And I think what he's banking on is everyone else.
Yeah, right.
Everyone that's not a deplorable or not a Bernie bro, that kind of like the way things were going under Barack Obama, that maybe want to see things drift a little bit back to the left, but in essence want to see things quieten down. Yep. Now, there's so much noise over here, and we see it a little bit in Australia as it filters back through, but they just want things to go back to normal. And Joe Biden has been normal for so long. He's just been part of the furniture. Like, he's been in the Senate for, I think it was near on 4 decades, then became vice president. You know, he's rough around the edges. He was middle class Joe. He's gaffe prone, which we know, but that's kind of, it's comforting. It's warm to them. It's something they can feel safe and secure with. And I think that's what he's really banking on if he is the candidate that takes on Trump in 2020.
I just want to turn the focus now to who could potentially be the running mate, because that's also quite important, as we saw with John McCain years and years ago, how choosing the wrong running mate can be just as bad as, you know, anything else. Who do you think in the hypothetical situation that Joe Biden does roll Bernie, who do you think out of the establishment's going to run with Joe?
So if you're Joe Biden, the big challenge is getting all those young people that fell in line with Bernie Sanders to come out and vote, because Hillary Clinton didn't do that. So Hillary Clinton chooses Tim Kaine. He's establishment. He's reliable. He's from Virginia. And the Bernie bros just stayed home. Now, there's lots of reasons for that. But there's an old saying that Democrats fall in love, Republicans fall in line. So Republicans will fall in line behind their candidate. If you've fallen in love with Bernie Sanders, like so many people over here have, what's going to inspire you to get out, go to the polls? In some situations, you know, hold your nose, close your eyes and vote for the Democrat, even though it's not the one you're in love with. And I think that's where Joe Biden will be looking. I think he'll want progressive. He realises his age, so he wants someone young. So you've got to look at someone around 50 or younger. You want someone that's probably a woman, because that's the way of the future. That's the way that America has so desperately needed for a while. And they're looking around and saying, they haven't had a female president or vice president, looking at every other sort of Western country and thinking perhaps we're a little behind the times. And then if you're Joe Biden, you've got a big question. Do you look at the minorities and say we need someone Latino to try and win back those voters that have gone to Bernie Sanders? Do we double down on the African-American vote because they were the people that got Barack Obama across the line in that coalition, and there are some great candidates there? Or do you look at someone who needs to be able to step into the job, because, let's be honest, Joe Biden is 77. And there is the chance that in 4 years' time. The other thing to look at, Joe Biden's not going to run again in 2004. He so much as admitted that last week. He said he's a bridge to the next generation. So go through that scenario. It's people like Kamala Harris from California, a senator, very popular. Stacey Abrams from Georgia is probably my tip at the moment. She's electrifying with young people. They love her.
That's your value bet.
That's the value bet. You get good price for her too at the moment. She's great. or maybe Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah.
Now,
Okay.
she's someone who the Bernie bros like. She's progressive. I mean, or you can really roll the dice and go like Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, but I think she might be a little bit risky.
Or Tulsi.
For his
Yeah,
ideas. Tulsi Gabbard. Yeah, exactly right. She's still in the race, by the way.
She is.
might be the last person still in
She
there.
hasn't pulled out. She got one delegate in American. She's Samoan and got less votes in Samoa than Michael Bloomberg.
Yeah.
Michael Bloomberg had 7 people on staff in American Samoa, though. Like, he was spending yeah. So I think they're the 3 big candidates. Look, Cory Booker would be great as well. Like, he's electrifying, young, African American. It's someone from that field.
Tell us a little bit about the race before this particular moment. Was this Bloomberg thing? Is there any strategy? Is there any excellence to this madness? As we just mentioned, he had 7 full-time staff in American Samoa, which was the only state that he won, state/territory that he won. I mean, that's a lot of money. American Samoa, you could have probably taken that with targeted Facebook ads. You didn't need 7 people on the ground.
Yeah, because according to our calculations here, he basically spent $8.2 million per delegate he got.
Yeah, and look, that's money terribly spent. I mean, that'd be like an Australian party investing all in on Christmas Island just to win that booth that's part of some other seat. He was probably one good debate away from being where Joe Biden is now.
Really?
And that all if things went better for him in that debate, that was the one chance people got to see of him, and he just got pillared by Elizabeth Warren. I mean, she just tore him apart. She filleted him on stage, and that was kind of his whole campaign done. A few days later, Joe Biden wins South Carolina. Then all the establishment Democrats, the moderates, fall in behind him, and we've seen the most remarkable turnaround in about 50 years. It all sort of started then. Had he not made that debate stage, he was the popular one because Joe Biden was one of those fragile front runners. No one was really sure about him. Everyone liked him in the moderates. They just weren't sure about him. And once he started winning, I think they thought he was their man. You know, we travel around and we've spoken to so many Democrats, and the one thing they all want is to beat Donald Trump. You know, we have a saying, the key word is the E word, electability. And the way you prove you're electable is by winning elections. And Joe Biden just started doing that. And had Mike Bloomberg done that somewhere better, then I think the party would have swung in behind him as well. Elizabeth Warren was leading the race 6 months ago. She was on the ascension and there was no way of catching her. The big question was, should Bernie pull out? Yeah. Kamala Harris 8 months ago was leading after she did the same thing that Elizabeth Warren did to Bloomberg. She did it to Joe Biden in the first debate. So there's never been a clear front runner. You know, this time last year, it was probably Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. Funnily enough, that's where they ended up. But at no stage did that seem stable, and that's continued even until now.
Do you think that, hypothetically, if Bernie Sanders gets the nod, would he take Elizabeth Warren along with him? Or would it be more wise for them to really, for the Warren campaign to hand over the delegates to Bernie and give it one red-hot crack?
Yeah, I think the red-hot crack, and I think he faces the same problem Joe Biden does, right? He is 78 years old. He's a white male, and that's just so far away from where the Democratic Party is these days. You know, it's meant to be this inclusive big tent, and here you've got the two oldest men in the race effectively fighting it out. Again, same names would come up with him: Stacey Abrams, Kamala Harris. Possibly there's some pretty sort of out there congresswomen that he could choose that would really sort of take on this and really push the revolution. Or Tulsi Gabbard is actually not out of the case for him. And that'd be just that would be like having Sarah Palin on the ticket. It'd be wild again, and it's going to be a wild enough election given who's on the other side.
Have there been any? I mean, obviously you've just said a lot of surprises. It hasn't been very stable. And it was really going to, the party was going to back whichever horse pulled away a full horse length. And that seems to have been Joe Biden at this point. Could have been any of them. But what are the more individual surprises you've seen across? I mean, was Nevada the biggest surprise so far?
Just how much Bernie Sanders managed to galvanize the Latino vote. You know, he's known as Tio Bernie, Uncle Bernie. It's this real sort of faction of the community he's picked up really well. Pete Buttigieg kind of came from nowhere. Like, there's a guy who's a small town mayor of a town slightly bigger than Betoota, but not by much, who managed to somehow become the cool young face of the Democrats, despite being from Indiana. He was war veteran. He was gay and married to his husband. He spoke 6 languages. He was the most unlikely candidate, yet he won Iowa. Like, he won the first contest. And then it was probably the disappointing results. Like Beto O'Rourke, who was the big shining star after 2018, who did nothing, came in, sort of flailed around, said he's going to take everyone's guns, and then bowed out a few weeks later. It's been like, there were just so many people in this race too. And then I guess Marianne Williamson, who was the clairvoyant, was Oprah's spiritual guider, and got herself somehow onto the first debate stage, and then spent most of the time speaking about positive vibes and auras, and said she was going to take on Jacinda Ardern and say "Game on, girlfriend" about being the new cool leader, and she's still a figure here somehow. Oh, and then the Yang Gang. That was the one that actually probably is the biggest thing. They were great. But the Yang Gang is a whole new era, and if the Yang Gang can show up, that would go a long way to help Joe Biden as well.
So did the Yang Gang, like, how big a base are we talking? Andrew Yang, the guy that was really into digital currencies and universal
basic income,
income, like,
he's going to give everyone $1,000 a month. That was his idea.
How big was that following by the end of it?
Very passionate online, pretty big. Like, he was still polling 4s and 5s. I got in a lift with him one day in Detroit before one of the debates, and just him and I was like, "Hey, how you going?" She said, "Yeah, I'm really good." Like my badge, and the badge said math on it, and that was it. That was our entire conversation. Like, this is a strange guy, but hey, he's got some great ideas, and I think I wouldn't be surprised if the Democrats win, and that's a huge if he's not part of some kind of a cabinet position as well, because he's got a big support, a big following, and sort of shifted the conversation by a lot more than the established. There were governors and senators and stuff that didn't shift the conversation as much as Andrew Yang did. It's the same as that Pete Buttigieg. Like, these guys shouldn't, in using all kind of logic, shouldn't have been on the debate stage in the first place, but they were really driving it, and they were a real force in the race.
Well, I've heard he's going to have a tilt at being the mayor of New York, but that remains to be seen. But I'd just like to move on to Super Tuesday. This is the next big contest that's coming up for Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, where there's upwards of 400 to 500 delegates on offer here, and this is probably going to make or break the two candidates. And the seats up there are Arizona, Florida, Illinois, Ohio. And a few days after, you've got Georgia. They seem like a good mix of states. I mean, you've got ones in the south, you got one in the north, you got one in the middle. How do you reckon each candidate's going to fare on Tuesday?
So Florida is pretty strong Joe Biden country. Good mix of elder Americans down there that swing Biden. Good mix of African Americans down there that swing Biden. And also Bernie Sanders has been pretty vocal in some of his support for dictators in the past, particularly Fidel Castro. That doesn't sit well with the Cubans in Florida. I think they will come out and vote against him. So that's going to hurt. Arizona is interesting because that's Bernie Sanders' big Latino base, but Joe Biden's Arizona, the most loved politician in Arizona has been for decades is John McCain. Funnily enough, the guy you mentioned, he's Arizonan. John McCain's best friend is Joe Biden. Yep. They ran against each other, but Joe Biden spoke at John McCain's funeral. I think that will have a big impact on how he's seen in Arizona. Ohio is always a huge swing state. That's one of the Bernie's sort of loved areas from 2016. I wouldn't be surprised if that's his last stand up there. And then Illinois was, of course, Barack Obama's home state. So there's still some pretty goodwill towards Joe Biden there. And I do wonder whether Barack Obama is starting to just nudge his weight in one direction sooner or later, whilst he's remaining out of the race officially.
So after that, there's not too many big contests left. I mean, there's Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, and that's really about it.
Yeah, New York, where Bernie Sanders was born, Pennsylvania, where Joe Biden was born. By that stage, I think the race will probably be over, and they'll at least know who's going to go into the conference with the most delegates. And really, I think unless it's neck and neck or Bernie Sanders is in full-blown revolution mode, if Bernie Sanders is leading by a margin, Joe Biden will quit. If Joe Biden's leading by a margin, Bernie Sanders will quit. If it's close, it's going to be the messiest 2 months since like the 60s over here in politics, and that will only benefit Donald Trump.
So when was the last time they called it that late in the game? No, the 60s. Who would it have been?
Like at the convention, there was a bit of drama at the convention in '68. That was the Democratic convention when Bobby Kennedy was leading, of course, and then got shot.
Yeah.
And so that ended up pretty messy. Late 50s, from memory, they were trying to run against Eisenhower, the Democrats again, and things got really ugly. And then there was one around the time just after Jimmy Carter, the election Jimmy Carter won. It was Gerald Ford going to 76 when Ronald Reagan had his first crack, and that got really ugly towards the convention on the Republican side. But most of the time, people just give in and march from there.
Now, can you just give us a little bit of a rundown here on that? You mentioned it before, the obviously the Obama legacy that Joe Biden gets to carry, but also you've got this African-American voter base who just aren't that interested in Bernie Sanders, unlike the Latinos that we mentioned earlier, Latino, Hispanic. But Joe Biden, do you think he carries this kind of loyalty from Black America because he played second fiddle to the first African-American president for 8 years?
Yeah, it can't hurt.
Yeah.
You know, he's good enough for Barack Obama. He's good enough for me in many ways. He got the endorsement of a guy named Jim Clyburn, who right now is effectively the kingmaker. What he did for Joe Biden in South Carolina kick-started, along with Mike Bloomberg's demise, but really told all those voters in South Carolina, you can trust this guy. And that really set the ball rolling for Joe Biden. That was a few weeks ago, and the vote before Super Tuesday. I think the African-American voters, and of course not everyone votes the same, but pretty loyal to Joe Biden as well because he's been around for so long and he goes to church in Georgia, he goes to churches in South Carolina. He's a Catholic. I think he would be, this could be wrong, the second Catholic president behind Kennedy. It's sort of a thing. Of course, Bernie Sanders would be the first Jewish president if he's elected too. So that's a thing as well. There's history on both sides.
The American middle is quite, Catholicism in Australia is a big bush thing. It's out west. You, a young altar boy yourself in the Hunter Valley, Charles.
I am.
You'd remember, but that's a regional thing in Australia. In America, Catholicism's more the cities and towns, and of course Latino areas
and the mafia.
But in the middle, it's Protestant, Protestant evangelical.
Evangelicals, and that's who's right behind the president at the moment. So that becomes its own battle. And I think, Joe Biden is moderate. I think largely the African American community are moderate as well, and he sort of appeals more to their spot on the political spectrum. Obviously, not everyone votes the same, but overwhelmingly so far. And really, we saw it in the states that voted last week, states like Michigan and Missouri, where one place Joe Biden won the African-American vote by 70 points or something. It's just become a non-event, which is almost unexplainable too, because Bernie Sanders is espousing policies that would probably benefit a lot of sort of lower class African-American communities, less so those that are in the middle class and wealthier. But, there's a lot of voters there that just aren't listening to his message at all.
Yep. So all of this discussion, Charlie, could be for nothing because they're going to have to jump the biggest hurdle, and that's knocking Donald off his perch. Are we going to see an election result like we saw in 1984, or is this going to be more or less like a 2000?
I think closer to 2000 than 84. 84 is, I just don't know that Ronald Reagan was beloved by everyone by that stage, or at least a large amount by that stage. And also the maps have changed, and America's terribly divided. The blue areas are getting bluer, the red areas are getting redder, and there's less in between. That is, those that vote Democrat congregating at the big cities in large cases are getting more Democrat, and the Republican areas, many places of the regions, are getting more Republican. So I don't think there's the scope for that kind of huge win like we saw. Look, Donald Trump is the favourite. There's no doubt about it. He has an election machine that is better funded, better resourced, better organised than it was 4 years ago. He has a Republican Party that is entirely his. It wasn't 4 years ago. People forget Ted Cruz went to that convention and didn't endorse Donald Trump. He told people to vote their conscience up and down the ticket. At one point, the Speaker of the House said he was just going to campaign for local candidates and forget about the president. Like, things were going badly for that Trump campaign. Not much could have gone worse, and he still won. So they would be confident heading in. The question is whether Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders can get enough of the Democrats to show up this time, because as you know, Donald Trump didn't win with a huge amount of voters, but he won in the right spots. It was smart campaigning, smart investing. Now, you look at those states that were part of Hillary's blue wall, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Will they come home again this time to the Democrats, or will Donald Trump keep hold of them?
And now, of course, Ted Cruz, who made life so hard for Donald Trump in that initial presidential dash, is suffering from coronavirus.
There's a few of them over here, and that's the X factor that no one can really play to.
Yeah.
Like, what does that do to the economy? Because the economy's singing at the moment, and that's going to be the thing that Donald Trump holds his hat on. However, he is not unbeatable, which is too many negatives. But this is a guy who lost elections and couldn't get candidates across the line in Kentucky. The same thing happened down in Alabama. These are red states that didn't vote for Donald Trump or didn't vote for Donald Trump's candidates, and then the same thing happened in that midterm election. So Democrats will be confident. The question is, as we said, can the Bernie bros suck it up and vote for Biden? Can the Biden crew, the moderates, if Bernie wins, go to the polls and show up? Or does Donald Trump's momentum, he's got fundraising, he's got crowds and all that thing. There is also a crazy scenario that is also possible this time where Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden wins Michigan and Pennsylvania. Donald Trump holds on to Wisconsin and picks up a seat in Maine, and we have a 269 each tie on the Electoral College, and then it goes into weird places after that. It's highly possible, unlikely, but possible, and that would be such a 2020 result if that's the way it went.
So can you tell us a little bit about, just quickly before we let you go, so for those listening at home, Charlie Croucher is via Skype here, and he's doing this outside, just away from the noise of his rowdy household, which also means to the passers-by, you're having a very animated LA phone conversation.
Yeah, we're in an apartment building as well. I'm kind of yelling at some point. Yeah. They're going to love it.
Can you tell us a little bit about coronavirus? Because one stat that we always look at when we talk about the momentum of Donald Trump, has he gained voters or has he lost them? Would he have gained voters since the last time he was elected? You were over there in 2016, and he didn't he played Moneyball. Not many people turned out for him. Less people turned out for Donald Trump than Mitt Romney in an election that Mitt Romney lost to Obama. I mean, obviously he won votes where they matter in regional booths. We have that same thing in Australia, where you can game it a little bit if you win, electorates by
talk to Kim Beazley about it.
Yeah. So effectively, he won that election on 300,000 votes across very pivotal delegations or booths across America. Can you tell us, is coronavirus going to affect the turnout, do you think? And has it already affected turnout in the primaries?
Well, it's crazy in the primaries where we have now at the stage where rallies are being cancelled. The debate had no crowd. This stuff is all unprecedented and kind of wild as well, and it's so hard to predict. And Donald Trump gets so much energy and so much of his publicity from those rallies. They're huge. By the way, so does Bernie Sanders. His rallies are much bigger than Joe Biden's, and that's part of his appeal. Young people get out, turn out and shout out. They scream for Bernie, and he has bands like the Strokes playing with him. There's all these kind of groups that get up and support him.
Public Enemy.
Public Enemy, minus Flavor Flav. That was here in California. Look, the biggest impact will be the economy, and if the economy goes, then it gets really hard for Donald Trump, because the statistics and the history, even though Donald Trump tends to defy statistics and history, as he always does. But you're right about that tactical money ball is the way you call it. There's a saying over here that if you've got $5 in one pocket and the popular vote in the other, then you can get a schooner of Betoota bitter at the Lord Gladstone.
Yeah.
If you haven't got the $5 though, you've got nothing.
Yeah.
And that's what Hillary Clinton walked home with. She had the popular vote in one pocket, but she got nothing.
Yeah.
And that's what someone like Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden look at. Bernie Sanders would beat Donald Trump by, I would imagine, millions possibly in California. But it's still only worth the same amount as a vote where you win California by one. And that's the biggest problem. So coronavirus is a huge X factor, one that would be hard to think of an example in the past where that's had to play a part, whether it impacts voting or not. we'll wait and see. But the economy certainly, and people can't travel, then that becomes another big thing.
Well, when you say the economy's doing all right, it's singing at the moment. What does that mean in America? Does that mean, like it meant in Australia during the mining boom, where people in the suburbs are buying high-end chops? You know what I mean? What does it mean in America? Are people in the Rust Belt back at work? Is that what's
fewer jet skis, more people at work? Yeah, exactly. It's the hard part. If people are employed, they might be underemployed. They might be working, multiple part-time jobs. And the big thing over here, that doesn't necessarily mean they get health care. And that's the biggest part. Nancy Pelosi, who's for now the senior Democrat, she said this election is going to be won on 6 words: healthcare, healthcare, healthcare. Yeah. And so that's where Democrats are going. Donald Trump will say, look at unemployment rates. If you have a job, you have a way to a living, you're on that ladder, you start to climb. Look, Wall Street's not the economy, but it's a pretty good marker, and it's easy to see and something you can point to, and that's what Donald Trump's done. Yeah. And if these tax cuts are going to come in, then that's going to be more money in people's pockets, and that goes back to that Reagan campaign of 80 when he said, is it easy if you go to the shops and buy things? And Trump will say something similar.
It's morning in America again.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. It's morning in Betoota.
Well, it's evening in LA, so thank you for joining us.
Not for the people in this apartment block. They're frantically Googling Betoota and getting upset at me.
Yeah, getting real nervous. Now, thank you for joining us, Crouch. Anything else? Any other curveballs to come, or do you reckon it's just now? I mean, if it's neck and neck, New York will be the decider.
Maybe.
Yeah, New York's pretty established, and I think they would swing. Their governor, Andrew Cuomo, was one of the first to come out behind Joe Biden. I think they'd swing in behind Joe Biden. I guess the mayor, Bill de Blasio, is one of the few people to endorse Sanders, so that'd be a fun race. But I think that'd be somewhere Joe Biden would be pretty confident of winning.
At what point in the 2008 campaign do you reckon Obama tore away? Because he was a surprise. He was not the value bet.
No, he won Iowa first up. Lost badly in New Hampshire. I think he was probably against South Carolina, Nevada, into Super Tuesday, got his nose in front, and by that stage it became almost okay for people to swing in behind Barack Obama, where before it was, the establishment was behind Hillary, and I think since then he was sort of gone. In many of the same ways, like Bernie Sanders in 2016 got in front in using Michigan, which he lost last week, but using Michigan all of a sudden became this race. So, yeah, Obama that was a movement as well. He had people turning out, he had celebrities turning out, he had the money and the fundraising, and that was over once he got past Super Tuesday.
And that was when he was still in his 40s, right?
Yeah. Well, Bill Clinton could run today, and he would be the youngest person in the field of the 3 men. He's younger than Donald Trump, younger than Bernie Sanders, younger than Joe Biden. He left office 20 years ago.
That's disgusting.
Wild.
Yeah, he was still getting erections when he was in office.
That was one of the issues.
Well, thanks for joining us, Croucher, and all the best. You'll be back in Australia on 9 soon.
Soon. Look forward to it.
See you soon, mate.
All right. See you, Crouch.